Okay, interesting. So you mentioned raising your kids, and they all love hunting. And this is as I've sort of followed your stuff, your family is part of your podcast and on Instagram. And the question is, how do we raise children to love hunting, the outdoor, hound hunting? Something I've experienced and I've seen in other outdoorsmen and hunters is the thing that you're so passionate about, that very passion ends up instantiating in sort of negative impulse. You want them to like it so much that you become frustrated, angry, and turning them off the thing that you care the most about. And it's a pitfall that I see the potential in myself and something I want to avoid. And it's something you've done. It's successfully. Was this sort of a conscious approach or just doing your thing?
It was, yeah, because I've got family members with, a pretty good size group of kids themselves that love to hunt that have had limited success, like maybe 1 or 2 out of 5 kids catch the bug. I've got friends that have experienced the same thing. And fundamentally, that can just be a personality thing where some kids just aren't interested, and that's fine. But I wanted to give each of my kids a chance to experience what I love about the outdoors and hunting. And I'd seen these other trends in other families early enough that I kind of did consciously tailor my approach with my kids. First, I do travel a lot, what with my job as an outdoor shooting and hunting writer for Peterson's Hunting, Shooting Time, several other magazines. And so I tried to always involve my kids in stories when I got back. So that kind of ignited a little bit of an internal fire before they were ever legally able to. And then when they did come of legal age, I was living in Utah at the time when my daughter, who was 8, and my little boy, William, he actually hosts our Backcountry Apprentice segment on the podcast. He was 6, very accomplished reader at the time. He took Utah's online hunter education course and passed it himself at the age of 6. And then he went and got his hunter education card. And I was allowed to sit with him and give him definitions of words like ecological conservation, management. A little 6-year-old might go, wait a minute.
or a reasonable adult.
Yeah. But I was never, I couldn't give him answers. And I didn't have to. He passed all on his own with flying colors. His sister at the age of 8 nearly aced her test. I think she missed 1 question. So, they were interested, and I supported them in their studies, but I never pushed them into it. And then when we did go on their first hunts, I tried to pick something that was simple and easy with a high percentage of success. And I think that's important because a kid doesn't do well if he's cold and exhausted and unsuccessful for 6 or 8 days in a row. Pretty quick they cotton on to the idea that hunting isn't fun, right? It's too much work and you're going to be miserable. That will screw a kid up. It'll pretty well douse that small flame of interest, right? So I would do simple things. My son William shot a turkey when he was 7, and he actually worked hard for it, but we were into him every day, so we always had that interaction with him. We went dove hunting, and I'm not stuck up about how kids shoot birds as long as it's legal. If they want to shoot one off a branch, I'll set up shooting sticks and give them a little 410, and they can stalk it like a big game animal, as long as it's legal. And like with turkeys too, pheasants, shooting them on the ground. I'll try and explain the sportsmanship and ethics side of it, but say, look, taking your first pheasant is a big deal. And as long as you do it legally, I'm okay with whatever method you use. But as you grow up and you mature and your shooting technique evolves, then I'm going to expect you to start hunting, behind our dog with, a wing shooting attitude where you're flushing the birds and taking these wild pheasants on the wing. And they really thrive on that because it gives them a series of achievements. I remember the first time my wife came with us dove hunting, and we had, funny enough, we'd found an old structure of telephone poles that had been built into a platform for some reason and then abandoned. and it was along a little lake on public ground, and doves tended to land there in the evening and just hang out in the sun for 10 minutes before they went off to the roost. So we went down, I taught my kids how to build a little blind out of sagebrush or hide, you know. We got in there and we hunkered down with the dog, and the kids had little shooting sticks. They were too little. I mean, they were 6 and a petite 8-year-old girl, right? Mm-hmm. They couldn't swing a shotgun, mm-hmm. at least not safely and with effect. And so we'd wait till a dove came and they'd shoot it off that platform. And each of them got, I don't know, 3 or 4 over the fall doing that. And each bird was a big deal. It's not like we were doing high volume dove shooting, right? 100% legal, effective, and they got to watch the dog go dashing out through the sagebrush and find the bird and bring it back and experience the joy of success. And then we'd go home, we'd take that bird apart right there, and we'd do jalapeno poppers on the grill that night, which is hard to go wrong there. And so they got to eat the result of their efforts. So as I started to say, I took my wife along on one of these, and as we're approaching our little blind, a bird came and landed up there, a dove did. And Audrey, who of course was 8 at the time, was carrying our little, it's a Mossberg youth shotgun, tiny, right, in 410. She loaded it like a pro, silently, and I set up the shooting sticks, and she went on there, just flowed onto it like a pro and knocked that bird down. My wife was standing back about 20 yards with her jaw dropped. She's like, oh my gosh, she is like good at this. And I said, you know what? They really generate some skills, some safe handling practices, which has been a very profound part of my teaching to them. And yeah, she's good at it. It was a pretty fulfilling moment for all of us.
Mm-hmm. We're not completely dissimilar from dogs in that we're sort of the summation of our positive and negative experiences, and sure. They tend to form feedback loops. So you develop that positive feedback loop, and it just gets bigger. You know, she's shooting the dove, and it's this enormous reward, right? Yeah, that's cool. I'm thinking about what you said about Louis L'Amour, and I think stories are vital to our understanding of the world, but also our projection of ourselves into the future. And it makes me happy to hear that you fed them on stories and they grew into it. You have spent a lot of time outdoors alone, you know, or in places which are sort of without culture, and that culture is a product of civilization. But it's clear that you orientate your life and your pursuits in the outdoors with values. And I'm still a shoot it off the ground bird hunter, and that I'm not like bird hunter at all. I grew up in the UK, and I had a BB gun, or like an air rifle, and I used to take the train out to the countryside and stay with friends from the city, and we would poach. Me and my 10-year-old friends would poach pheasants on the edges of these estates where they raised 10,000 pheasants, and the BB gun would never kill the pheasant. You shoot it with the BB gun, and then you run and you stomp. We call it shoot, sprint, stomp. But so I'm not above. I'm far below that. But there is a certain value that you seem to try to bring to your hunting and your approach to the outdoors. How do you build a culture? How do you take a culture of something into solitude, and how do you build a culture which around much of which time is spent alone? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I understand what you're getting at. There may not be a societal culture in the backcountry, and especially when you're solo back there, but there is an inherent ambiance, if I can use that word, I guess. Whether you're doing a cold camp and being as low impact as possible and living among the animals you're hunting, or you have a nice campfire and you've set up a wall tent with a little stove in it, there's an automatic feel and lifestyle there within your efforts. And the culture itself, the depth of the experience often depends a lot on the place you're in and your attitude about it. And I've been in everything from the most inspiring solo hunt experiences to some that literally tear your moral fiber apart. And you sometimes feel like a caged animal, right? And you have to deal with yourself days on end until you get picked up by that bush plane or whatever. Try and find a way to be productive and mentally stay as human as possible. And the backcountry strips away a lot of layers in yourself when you're out there. And I think that's often why it's, at least in the beginning, if you're just getting into it, it's best to go with a friend, because that friend can help put patches on where the wrong layers get stripped off, and can help keep a positive attitude. A good hunting partner will subconsciously recognize when you're struggling and will lift you, and you do the same for them. A really good hunting partnership is hard to find, very valuable when you do find it.
When you're alone, does bringing culture to that solitude in the wilderness, does that help deal with the difficulties of it?
It can, yeah. So I always try and take a good book. And I'm a religious man, so I'll have several books of scripture downloaded onto my phone as well. And as long as my phone hasn't died, I can go to those. But I try and bring a good book that's got literary quality and is a captivating read on a subject that provokes out-of-the-box thoughts. So this last trip, this moose hunt, drop camp hunt I did with my friend Joe Kennedy, I took a book called West with the Night. And Hemingway wrote about it that the author was such a good writer that it made him feel like he shouldn't even be writing, right? And it's about a young woman who grew up in Africa. She was, I believe she was also British by birth, but grew up in Africa. And her father lost everything when she was in her late teens. She became a racehorse trainer and then a airplane scout and emergency supplies runner. She got her own plane. She would fly through the night when nobody flew at night back then. This is like early 1900s. And deliver medical supplies to save people from dying. She would fly scouting missions for safaris and find the herds of buffalo and elephant and so forth, all solo, out in brutal country. And she documented it all with incredible literary capability. And so that sort of book I try and take with me. And then when I'm sitting on a ridge overlooking a vast canyon in Alaska or here in Idaho or wherever the case may be, and things are slow, I'll read a chapter or two, and that prompts thoughts that, in a funny way, bring it all together, because I'm out there trying to get someplace where I'm not going to see anybody else, where I'm going to experience a type of solitude and challenge that you don't get where other people are readily available to help you or get in your way. So, yeah, I don't know. It's a beautiful thing being in the backcountry if you're well prepared and have the right mindset. Horses are another thing. If you're a horse person, that's companionship and a proper mechanical advantage if you start hauling an elk out or whatnot. And yet you're caring for them. They become a friend and a burden on you as you hunt.
MC Escher, who was this artist, most of the audience probably knows his pictures. They're sort of these convoluted and impossible to believe geometric drawings. He wrote, "I'm walking around all alone in this splendid garden that does not belong to me, and the gate of which stands wide open for anyone. I dwell here in refreshing but also oppressive loneliness. That is why I've been attesting to the existence of this idyllic spot for years, without expecting many strollers to come, however." And I think it's that phrase, refreshing but oppressive loneliness, has stuck with me. A couple of years ago, you did that series where you were hunting moose alone, and I guess this last year you went with a friend, but was it 2 years ago you went
Caribou.
with... Oh, caribou, sorry. And I listened to the series on my phone, which I downloaded as I was alone on my first solo big game hunt. And
cool.
I found the solitude really taxing. It's not being tired from the tent, sleeping out, or cold and wet. It's like I really found the psychological component the most difficult. And it's not something that I think most people talk about. There is that amazing feeling where you're out and the risk is real, and you're not, you're in a place where there are no other people. But I think it's that contradiction of refreshing but oppressive loneliness. Could you tell us about your experiences with that feeling and sort of learning? I think because we don't want to get rid of it, right? I think it's how do you learn to live with it in a positive way?
You know, the most alive I've ever felt is when I'm solo in the backcountry, and the more remote that backcountry is, the more alive you feel, because it becomes more and more raw, and the reality that if you screw up, you'll probably die becomes more and more substantial, or potentially die, right? And that particular experience you alluded to there 2 years ago, caribou hunt, I was dropped above timberline for, I think it was 8 days, 7 or 8 days, by a bush plane, and got a caribou the night of my second day there. Had it hauled, all hauled out by the end of the third day. Kind of screwed up and got exhausted that day. I pushed myself a little too hard and didn't eat for lunch, and so by the time I got back to the tent right before dark, a huge rainstorm was coming in, lots of wind, and I was so tired I was no longer hungry and didn't want to eat. And I think I was borderline hypothermic at that point, right? But I forced myself to make a hot meal, a hot mountain house meal, and get it into my body, because I knew the signs abstractly that I was kind of in trouble, right? Got the food in me, got into my sleeping bag, and it took me about 3 hours to get warm. And then that storm lasted about 4 days. Had a couple of brief windows when the wind let up and the rain let up, but my electronic devices all basically quit on me. My solar charger went belly up. My phone was almost out of battery, and so I couldn't read on it. I couldn't watch the films I downloaded to it. Usually I don't like to watch films in the backcountry, but if you're in a tent day after day with apocalyptic levels of rain and wind going on outside of you, your mind gets real bored, especially being a productive person. You know, I always want to be productive.
It's something that I think the sort of abstract purist who hasn't gone, you know, the non-hunter who hasn't gone out, or non-outdoors person who hasn't gone out and spent that time locked down. Why would you listen to a podcast? You know, enjoy your Aldo Leopold solitude. But it's a real thing when you're out there, and like it helps to make it, you know, have a more positive, be able to enjoy it more and be more positive about it. Yeah. I'm like that as well, and I think probably most hunters are probably like that, where we like to be productive. And when you were describing that, being locked down in the tent for days, I was like, at least you had the podcast to think about and material to make, because I would be miserable.
I did. I recorded a lot, because I take a little handheld recorder with me when I go on these trips, and I try and record 5 to 15 minutes a day. I was recording a couple hours a day in there just for something to do, but the productivity is really key to hunting solo. I love hunting solo, whether it's just a long day on your own, where you leave camp, you know, an hour before daylight, bid your hunting friends good luck, and you're on your own through the entire day in 6 inches of snow, glassing for elk and tracking, trying to find a big bull track, and then you come back in the dark, and either there's a big campfire waiting, or you build one and you sit around it and you share the day's stories with your friends. Just a solo hunt through a day is probably my favorite way to hunt. Then a step deeper is where you go out on your own, but in complete control of what your tasks are, where you're hunting, and when you come back. So this is on your horses, with a backpack, going from a trailhead, even truck camping on your own, you know, somewhere several hours from home. I enjoy that quite a bit, because you can strategize, you can go into an area and hunt it hard for a couple of days, and if you're not seeing what you want to see, you can answer that call of the wild, and that inherent thing within us that always wants to see around the next corner, into the next canyon, right? And you can move. You can go out to your truck and drive to another area. You can get on your horse and ride through a couple of different drainages, or put on your backpack and move. And then when you're done, whatever that means, you can come out at your own discretion. A drop camp hunt is the deepest, most challenging type of solo hunt because you're in one spot, right? And you don't get to come out until the pilot comes for you. And often weather will delay that as well. And you can't do a thing about it. And the more you throw a fit about it, the worse it becomes because the pilot gets grumpy about it and just spirals. The more you dwell on it and get all full of angst about it, the worse you feel about it. So being productive is incredibly important. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, it's a good it's an extreme lesson which you then take back to this world, the world of men and other things, and I think it probably gives good context for not allowing yourself to develop those negative circles of angst and frustration because at the end of the day they aren't useful and they sort of implode. So one thing I've noticed as I've sort of gotten a little bit older, and when I was 18 and I left the house, I had nothing bringing me home. Like I didn't have to go home for wherever my home was. It wasn't much. It was just like a bed. And the more you have familial relationships and things which give you joy in life, it's sort of a unfortunate or difficult contradiction. The more I have felt the pull of like when I'm out for days at a time alone. Oh, and I imagine with kids this is sort of exponential. How do you balance that dynamic of the need to be out there, but also and also the need to develop a positive home life, but I've got friends sort of who are very fearful of developing any sort of home life because it's going to pull them out of the field. And how do you balance those things? Because I think ideally we all want to have both.
Yeah. I think I'm blessed there in a way that very few serious hunters are, because I make my living writing about my experiences and now podcasting about my experiences. And if I didn't have those experiences, I would be lacking material with which to make a living, right? So my wife's always been very supportive. It's hard on the family, but I do have that. It's not even an excuse. It's simply a fact about my life that if I'm not going and doing things, my work's going to suffer. And as the kids have gotten older and they're in sports now and they all want to hunt and so forth, and they become more cognizant of the fact that you're leaving them for 6 nights or whatever it is, and you start feeling that more and more. I think there are a few things that can really help folks that are struggling with this dynamic, this contradictory set of desires to be home and yet to be out hunting. One is make sure you're financially responsible about it. Work hard, put aside money for your adventures, and make sure your family is getting an equal amount of attention and financial attention as well. I have friends that have pulled big chunks of money out of the family budget to go out on an adventure and created a scar in their marital relationship that's always going to be there. That's not smart. So just work a little harder, take a side job, whatever, make sure you dedicate time to your family so that from their perspective, you're still doing the right thing. And then if you have kids, it always makes things better if you can take one of them with you. As soon as one of your kids is old enough and interested enough to go do those adventures, start taking them with you, because then your spouse is actually appreciative of the fact that you're out there and you're giving that young person an experience that they wouldn't get any other way. As far as leaving on your own and just being out there and missing your family, yeah, that happens. Every time I come back from one of the really long, deep backcountry adventures, I appreciate my wife a lot more. I'm a lot more tolerant of my kids because for a while I feel like all the chatter and noise and neediness and all that is just wonderful because I'm backing it, I'm basking in it, right? Mm-hmm. Crawling into bed at night on a real mattress beside a warm body that loves you is such a blessed thing after sleeping for 12 days on a little pad on rocks, right? Oh, I think it's important sometimes to try and remember those things, hold on to them, because all too quickly, speaking for myself, that fades, and I'm just, the old grump again.
Yeah. You walk down the same street 1,000 times, you stop seeing it. But I think when you have sort of testing experiences, it can return the stone to stoniness, and that's something people sort of become addicted to substances or to travel because it's your. But I think the experiences that you pay the most for are usually the most honest and pure, returning to feeling and sensation. And I think we all sort of hunger for that. It's a terrible idea to go through life without seeing the world. So when we go out and then return and have a whole new sight sometimes it's like, oh wow, now that I come out and I see this thing I've returned to more clearly, I got to change some things here, but it's still good to see.
Yeah. Oh, and I've had my wife tell me a few times after coming back from one of these things, she'll wait a few days to see if it sticks, and then she'll say, you know what, you've changed. I like it.